Hi, my name is Sven, welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about a term that came up in color grading in DaVinci Resolve quite often recently, color space aware grading tools. Since the release of Resolve 17, they are an integral part of Resolve, allowing efficiency and consistency across different color spaces, and with each release there are new tools introduced that are in fact color space aware. Today we are going to have a look at what the term means, which tools are color space aware, and what those tools do. We will look at how they actually work and hopefully overcome some misconceptions about them. First, we have to define what the term means, and for that we have to understand what a color space is. I have a full-length and very detailed video about color spaces and color management on my channel if you want to know more about this topic. But for now, let's try to keep it brief and simple. We already know that there's capturing color spaces such as RE White Gamut 3 log CV3 or Sony S Gamut Cine S log 3. And there are working color spaces like Asus CCT AP1 or DaVinci White Gamut Intermediate. And then there's also display color spaces like Rec 709 or P3. When we work with color management, we usually do the following. We first select an input color space for our footage. This then gets converted to the timeline working color space, where we do all of our color grading, and in the end we convert from the timeline working color space to the output color space. The exact how and why is explained in my full-length video on color management, so I highly recommend you watch that episode first so you really understand what we are talking about in this video right now. The important part just now, however, is the timeline working color space. In order to understand what color space aware is, let's first talk about what it is not. So, for example, lift, gamma and gain behave in a certain way if our timeline color space is, for example, DaVinci Intermediate. However, if the timeline color space would be log CV3, the same adjustments done with lift, gamma and gain would give us a different picture. And that is because those tools are really simple math operations like multiplication or power function. Because the incoming signal to this node is different in DaVinci Intermediate and in log CV3, the tools of course output different results. This can be easily seen when we bypass the output transform and look at the image in its current state. In DaVinci Resolve, color space aware means that certain grading tools recognize and adapt to the color space of the timeline. For example, the HDR wheels in Resolve are color space aware. They give you the same result no matter if you work in DaVinci Intermediate or log CV3. But how does it work? In short, they convert from the timeline color space to some arbitrary tool color space, and this could be anything depending on the specific tool. Then do some grading operations and then convert back to the timeline color space. The HDR palette, for example, has its own tool color space, maybe even several, that lets you accurately adjust photometric exposure in stops, and this can only work as intended when the tool knows the color space of incoming data. One way would be to select the color space in this menu, but this can become rather complicated, especially when there are many clips in the timeline. For that reason, you are able to tag the timeline color space in the project settings and leave the tool itself at Use Timeline. This is automatically done when you use the project color management. Note that when this is set up incorrectly, the HDR palette will not work as intended and can produce unwanted results. So you should always check the timeline color space tag when you start a new project. Several tools in DaVinci Resolve are inherently color space aware. The HDR palette is one of the most prominent color space aware tools, but also other tools like Color Warper and Color Space Transform adjust their behavior based on the input and output color spaces. Basically all the tools that have a drop-down to select the color space are color space aware. Those include halation, chromatic adaptation, film look creator and even the color stabilizer. But at the same time there are tools that are not color space aware by default, but can be, and for those there's a little checkbox in the project settings. The color space aware checkbox in the project settings can be particularly helpful for tools like curves, contrast and pivot and the qualifier. When this setting is enabled, these tools behave differently than before because now they also convert from the timeline color space to their tool color space. For the curves and the qualifier, this would be HSL. With this setting enabled, you make sure that the tools behave the same way in an Asus project as they do in a DaVinci Intermediate project, even though the timeline color spaces are different. While it generally sounds like a good idea to make tools like the curves and qualifier color space aware as well, we did find some bugs with this feature and would recommend leaving it off in certain cases. One bug that hasn't been resolved yet is when you work in a color managed environment with a timeline luminance of 100 or 1000 nits, so all of those presets. The issue is that when you darken the image with, for example, offset or lift, and then reduce the contrast, you end up with nasty artifacts in the blacks. You might say, well, then don't do it, but sometimes during grading the image gets stretched and pulled so far in the process that those artifacts become prominent. And I did actually find this problem by accident while doing a job. For ACES and custom settings, so far it seems safe when the timeline luminance is set to something higher than 1000. Oftentimes you will hear people say that the HDR palette is one of the tools that is affected by the checkbox in the project settings. However, as we saw earlier, the tool works color space aware no matter what, it just needs the correct information to work as expected. Another thing many people say is that the settings makes the tool adjust to the clip's input color space. Note that earlier when I explained how color space aware works, I didn't say the color space of the clip, but the color space of the timeline. And this is important because at that point in the color pipeline where you enter the color page, all input color spaces are already converted to one common timeline color space. And if you're doing manual color management with nodes, the HDR palette does not magically know what you selected in the CST before. So you should therefore either tell it in the tool menu over here or tag the timeline correctly in the project settings. In summary, some tools in DaVinci Resolve are color space aware by default and always look at the timeline color space. Others are not but can be turned color space aware. But also a bunch of tools like lift, gamma and gain are not color space aware. The main reason for enabling the checkbox in the project settings is that tools feel the same no matter what timeline color space you're working in. But at the same time, if you always grade in the same timeline color space, this wouldn't make a big difference anyway. Apart from the bug we talked about earlier, it really depends on your personal preference. So that's it for today. I hope you got a better understanding about color space aware grading tools, and let me know in the comments below if you still have any questions. Also, if you want to help out the channel, please consider subscribing so you don't miss any future episode, and until then, I will see you in the next video.